So at the Sakyadhita conference last month in Malaysia, I met many amazing people. And some of the people I met, I felt like I should have known them already. So I want to do a bit of a show of hands to see, of these names, what ones you're already familiar with. So raise of hands, how many of you know or are familiar with Rahula Mata? Okay, I see one. What about Bharakachana? None. Bimba? These are Pali names. And Yasodhara? Okay, one. So this makes me feel better, because I was kind of afraid that everyone else here would know all about it, and it was just me who this was new to. So it was near the end of the conference, and it was the fourth workshop session. There were 4 parallel opportunities to go to workshops, and we had presented in 2 of them, so this was my chance to go to a workshop, and I'm wandering around trying to figure out what workshop I want to go to. And I see the name of this workshop on the wall, and it says, okay, an early reconnaissance report of this. And I start looking at this word, thinking, I want to attend this workshop to find out what this is. I tried to make a long enough piece of paper and failed, so it's all one word. I hyphenated it out of need. So when I saw this word, I said, I want to go to this workshop and find out about this. And so I will tell you a little bit about this, and it will actually be, I think, information for you since you didn't know about those names, which those are all referring to the same person. So Bhikkhuni Yasodhara Teri, it was the Buddha's wife, or the Bodhisattva's wife before he attained enlightenment. And so Rahula Mata is one of her names, meaning she's the mother of Rahula. And what's interesting is apparently in the Sanskrit text, she's often referred to as Yasodhara, and I'm sure I'm doing a butchering of all of these words, especially the Pali ones. But in the early Pali text, she's more often referred to as Bharakachana. And so this is someone who, is mentioned in many different texts, including in the list of the foremost bhikkhuni disciples of the Buddha. So an English translation of this is, this is the foremost of my nun disciples, monastics, amongst those who have attained very deep knowledge, that is to say, Bharakachana. So not only was she the Buddha's wife back when he was Prince Siddhartha and the mother of Rahula, but then she ordained. And what's interesting is, of course, different traditions tell the story different ways. She may have been one of the 500 women who went with Mahaprajapati Gautami, that's often said. And so it's said that she ordained at age 40 and attained arhatship in 2 weeks. So that's pretty good. Most of us, have been, I think everyone here in robes has been ordained more than 2 weeks. And show of hands, how many arhats in the room? Okay, none. Right, so, we're working on it, but, slightly different goal, obviously. But how did she attain such a feat so quickly? Well, she had had many, many, many past lives with the Bodhisattva, who is going to be Buddha Shakyamuni. And even when he had left the palace to go out and go on his spiritual journey, there were many texts saying, she was quite sad about this, she grieved and despaired, and this is something where kind of modern takes on it can get a little harsher even. And certainly myself and some others have had that experience, like in SAFE, when we first talk about the Buddha's life story, especially mothers, read that the Buddha, left his wife and child, and they're upset about this. And so kind of this bigger picture story of Yasodhara really paints it in a different lens. That one reading is actually that she was upset that, he just hadn't told her. And so from the Tere Apadana, which recounts the story of the Parinirvana of Yasodhara, as well as Mahaprajapati, and has stories of the nibbanas or nirvanas of many of the great bhikkhuni, I'm trying to use the Pali word since these are Pali text disciples, I'd love to read a portion of it. It's tricky in that I highlighted just a bit and it's still quite long, but the original kind of story, and these are verses spoken theoretically by Yasodhara before her Parinirvana, going and telling the Buddha that she was about to pass away and pass into then Parinirvana. So I'll just read a part of it. I performed a lot of service for the sake of you, O great sage. While you sought the Buddha's teaching, I was always your attendant. 100,000 eons and 4 incalculable eons hence, Dipankara, great hero, the leader of the world, was born. Someplace in a nearby country, inviting him, the thus gone one, happy-minded folks are clearing the road on which he is coming. At that time, there was a Brahmin known by the name of Sumedha. He was making the road ready for the all-seer who was coming. At that time, I was a maiden, born in a Brahmin family, known by the name of Sumita. I went up to that gathering with 8 handfuls of blue lotus for offering to the teacher. In the midst of all the people, I saw that fierce ascetic sage. Seeing him seated atop bark, surpassing and captivating, then I thought like this to myself, this life of mine is bearing fruit. At that time, I saw that sage's effort which was then bearing fruit. Due to my previous karma, my heart was pleased in the Son Buddha. Making my heart even more pleased, I said, O lofty-minded sage, seeing no other gift to give, I'm giving flowers to you, sage. There are 5 handfuls for you, sage. The remaining 3 are for me. Let there be success through this gift for your awakening, O sage. So basically, she gave flowers in this very long ago past life to the person who would eventually become Shakyamuni Buddha. And it goes on to describe how, she would be a wife for many eons. And Dipankara Buddha prophesies that, she would be a bodhisattva and work to gain all of this merit and be doing that to help the person who would become Shakyamuni Buddha. So that's in the Pali Canon, this amazing story of, this woman who on her own was a fantastic practitioner and then was also working to help this other person attain Buddhahood. We also work to help other people attain Buddhahood, don't we? So while one could maybe look at that and have a feminist critique about, women always serving men, we are certainly working for the Buddhahood of each and every sentient being, women and men. So there's this fairly long passage in the Terapadana, and there are other stories mentioning Yasodhara. But within the Pali Tripitaka itself, it doesn't mention the date of her parinirvana, it doesn't mention the location of it, and it doesn't really talk about her relics or any stupa where the relics were put. And so it was actually Ayatataloka of Dhammadharini Monastery wanted to research this and had been working on it for something like 10 years. And in 2024 really had this breakthrough of finding some Southeast Asian texts from Cambodia and Thailand that actually had more information. So these are Pali texts that are not canonical per se texts, but have this great information. So what was that workshop that I attended? It was a presentation by Samaneri Arya Dhammajivi, who is a nun at Dhammadharini, and she went to Paris to look at a manuscript that Ayatataloka had found online that was kind of an old Cambodian manuscript that seemed to explain this story as well. And so that was actually the name of this manuscript. It has apparently 5 different names. This was the second longest one. There was an even longer one. And it was so interesting to hear her recount this story of how, her teacher said, oh, I found this manuscript, that's this Cambodian manuscript, and Shamaneri Dhammajivi is Cambodian, so she can read the language. And so kind of last minute, about a month before she was to ordain, she went with some family members to Paris and had 3 days in the EFEO library requesting these old Cambodian palm leaf texts. and was able to look at them wearing gloves, digitizing them with her cell phone, and was very meticulous in taking these photos, and taking 460 photos of these palm leaf texts, so 3 photos per text. And it's in a text called Kom, writing, which is then kind of representing the Pali, and it's similar enough to Khmer that she could just read it, not even realizing that it was a slightly different language. And so they could compare it to other texts that existed in the Pali and really then compare them side by side. Now, the transliteration of this Cambodian text she looked at is still in progress. And so they don't have the full English version or even the full Pali version yet. But because she could read the text, Ayatataloka could basically say, oh, can you look for this word? And so she was able to skim through and find, okay, the date of Yasodhara Bhikkhuni's Parinirvana was the full moon Posada of the 4th month of the Cambodian lunar calendar. And this kind of verified against other sources they had found. The location is north of Sravasti. This is where I'm trying to understand some of the Pali words, at her Bhikkhuni monastery near the Achiravati River. And then there was a statement that her relics are like magnolia flowers and that they were put into a stupa. So I found this story amazing, where it's like, okay, she goes to Paris and just has this tiny window of time to look at these manuscripts, and they're able to get this information, and at this point it's matching what's been found in Thai and other Southeast Asian manuscripts. So I was really inspired by this. There was then a talk on the very last day by a professor, I think, out of India, who talked about these different names and tracing back, looking at Sanskrit and Pali texts and trying to understand, what was her original real given name? How did these different names evolve? And so for me, I was just really floored that this was a bhikshuni I didn't know about. I wasn't familiar with her. I guess I'd never really thought much about, who was the Buddha's wife? What was she up to? And the answer is, she was having her own spiritual journey and attained to quite high realizations and had been on that path for a very, very long time, helping someone else attain Buddhahood. So I was very inspired by this, and I think this is kind of, the word feminist was certainly used frequently at Sakyadhita. They weren't afraid of that word. And for me, this is kind of an example of that, where we don't have to be angry or anything like that. It's simply going, wow, we can look at the texts and just find amazing female role models. And, maybe through the evolution of Buddhism over 2,000 years and who it was who was in charge of copying and translating texts, we don't always have a lot of information about them. But when you look, as many bhikkhuni and bhikshuni scholars now are doing, you can find this information. We can find these incredible practitioners that the Buddha himself said amazing things about. So I was really inspired by this, and I hope to continue to learn. This research is ongoing at Dhammadharini. They now in 2024 and 2025 kind of celebrated her Parinirvana date. So they're actually bringing attention to this, and this is now becoming kind of part of Buddhist culture. So again, I met many excellent people at Sakyadhita, and Yasodhara was one I was quite happy to get to know.